I have a story of dying and going to heaven. I was working in
Michael Rowen was clinically dead for nearly 7 minutes. What he saw, and remembered, during that time would shatter everything he once believed about life, death, and what lies beyond. A retired military medic hardened by war and loss, Michael thought he understood the finality of death. He was wrong. This is not just a near-death experience. It's a gripping journey beyond the veil, where time collapsed, truth was unveiled, and the afterlife welcomed him home. He was never supposed to remember, but he did. Hold on a minute, if you have not subscribed to our channel, do well to subscribe, like, comment and share videos of this channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell.
My name is Michael Rowen. I'm 56 years old, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm a retired military medic. I spent most of my adult life serving others, on the front lines, in medical tents, and inside helicopters. I saw a lot of things during my years of service, but nothing comes close to what I'm about to tell you now. This story is not easy for me to share. For a long time, I didn't even know how to put it into words. But I believe it's too important to keep to myself any longer. In 2003, something happened to me that changed everything. I had what people call a near-death experience, or NDE. Some folks might roll their eyes at that kind of thing. I would have too, before it happened to me. But I can promise you, what I saw, what I felt, and what I learned on the other side, was more real than anything I've ever known in this life. For over 15 years, I didn't talk about it. Not to my wife, not to my closest friends. I didn't think anyone would believe me. And maybe I was afraid too, afraid of sounding crazy or of losing the respect of people who knew me as a man of science and reason. In the military, especially in the medical field, you're trained to follow facts. There's not much room for mystery or faith in what can't be proven. So I buried it. But silence is a heavy thing. As the years went by, the memory didn't fade, it grew stronger. I started having dreams, strange feelings, and a deep pull to understand what I had gone through. Eventually, I retired, and the weight of that story became too much to carry alone. So now I'm telling it, because someone out there might need to hear it. Maybe you've lost someone. Maybe you're afraid of what comes after. I hope my experience helps you see that there's nothing to fear. It was the fall of 2003, and I was still on active duty, working in a field hospital outside of Washington, D.C. There was a serious viral outbreak going around at the time. People were getting sick fast. High fevers, vomiting, and extreme dehydration. Our hospital was full day and night. Every shift felt like a marathon, and we were all running on fumes. I was used to working under pressure, but this was different. We didn't know what exactly we were dealing with. Some said it was a mutated flu strain, others thought it might be something worse. All we knew was that it was spreading fast and taking people down hard. That day started like any other. I had just wrapped up a 12-hour shift, and I was about to head back to the barracks for some rest when an emergency call came in. They brought in a woman who had collapsed at a nearby shelter. She was struggling to breathe, drenched in sweat, her skin pale and clammy. The medics who brought her in said she had been locked in a room for days, too weak to get help. I couldn't just walk away. Instinct kicked in, and I started assisting. We were short-staffed, and I had the most trauma experience, so I jumped in without thinking. I remember leaning over her, trying to get an oxygen mask over her face. She was panicking, trying to sit up, and in that moment, she exhaled right into my face, hard. I felt the breath hit me deep in my lungs. I didn't have time to think about it. I just kept working. 2 days later, I knew something was wrong. I woke up with chills so bad I couldn't stop shaking. My stomach turned on me. Vomiting, diarrhea, nonstop. My body felt like it was shutting down. I couldn't keep down the water. Every joint aches. I remember looking in the mirror and not recognizing myself. My face looked hollow, my skin gray, and I had dark circles under my eyes. My heart was racing, but I couldn't feel a steady pulse. I knew enough to recognize the signs. My blood pressure had dropped dangerously low. My wife called the base hospital, and they sent an ambulance right away. I was barely conscious when they arrived. The medics started IVs on the spot and rushed me in. Everything after that became a blur. I remember flashing lights, the sound of monitors, the rush of being wheeled down a hallway, and then, nothing. Just blackness. I didn't know it then, but my body was shutting down. I was going into full system collapse. And that's when everything changed. The hospital was chaotic when I got there. The outbreak had filled every available room. Patients lined the halls on gurneys, for bags hanging from makeshift stands. The staff looked worn out, rushing from bed to bed, trying to keep up. I was wheeled into a small corner room that barely had space for 2 people. The fluorescent lights overhead were too bright, and every sound felt amplified, the beeping machines, the buzz of voices, the echo of carts rolling down the halls. A young nurse and a tired-looking doctor stood over me. They were moving quickly, hooking me up to monitors, running fluids through the IVs. I could barely lift my head, but I remember the nurse saying something about giving me medication for pain and nausea. I tried to protest. My stomach had settled, and I wasn't in pain, just weak, but I didn't have the strength to speak. She injected something into the foreline. It was a combination drug, something like synthetic morphine mixed with an anti-nausea medication. The moment it entered my bloodstream, I knew something was wrong. My chest tightened, and the room started spinning. I heard a sharp ringing in my ears. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Then suddenly it just dropped. Like a plug had been pulled. My vision tunneled. The edges of the room darkened until I could barely see. I remember trying to take a breath and realizing nothing was happening. My lungs weren't moving air. I felt myself slipping. My arms and legs went cold, and a deep, strange calm settled over me, like the quiet just before a storm. I could feel my pulse fluttering at my wrist, and then it was gone. No beat. Just silence. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was someone yelling for Narcan. I didn't know it at the time, but they were trying to reverse the overdose. My blood pressure had crashed to the floor, something like 40/0, and I was unresponsive. They rushed more meds, tilted the bed so my head was lower than my feet, and worked on me for what I was later told was a solid 15 minutes. I didn't hear the machines. I didn't feel the IVs or the pressure cuffs. I didn't see the panicked faces around me. Because by that point, I was already somewhere else. My body was still in that hospital room, but I wasn't. I had stepped out. And what came next, nothing could have prepared me for that. The moment I left my body wasn't like how movies show it. There wasn't any big flash or dramatic sound. It was more like something soft breaking loose, like a sigh from deep inside me. 1 second I was in that hospital bed, drowning in my own body, and the next, I wasn't. I felt light, impossibly light. I wasn't in pain anymore. I wasn't gasping for air or fighting to stay conscious. All of that was gone. I was floating, just a few feet above the bed at first. I saw myself lying there, pale, still, hooked up to wires. It was like looking at a stranger. The body meant nothing to me anymore. I didn't feel tied to it. There was no panic, no sadness. Just peace. The fear I had been carrying for days, about dying, about leaving people behind, melted away like it had never belonged to me. In its place was something I don't have the right words for. Joy, maybe? Or relief? Or something deeper than both. I felt like I'd been holding my breath my whole life, and now I could finally exhale. The room around me faded. It wasn't dark, but it wasn't exactly light either. It was like the space around me opened up into something vast. I wasn't in the hospital anymore. I was drifting upward into this incredible space full of soft, glowing colors. Golds, blues, purples, colors that didn't stay still, they shimmered and moved like they were alive. And the stars, if that's even what they were huge, much bigger than anything I'd ever seen in the sky. They pulsed with energy, and each one seemed to welcome me, like they knew me. They weren't cold or distant. They felt warm, familiar, almost like family. I moved through them without effort, just gliding. There was no gravity, no direction, just movement and comfort. It was like floating in the warmest, most loving current you could imagine. I wasn't alone either. I couldn't see faces at first, but I could feel presence around me. They were gentle, kind, watching over me. I wasn't afraid. I felt more at home in that space than I ever had on Earth. And I remember thinking one thing, clear as day. How could I have forgotten this? How did I ever believe that my life down there was all there is? The moment I left my body, everything that used to feel heavy, my worries, my grief, even my name, just fell away. And what was left was me. Just me. Whole, light, and free. I don't know exactly when it hit me, but somewhere in that space. Beyond the hospital bed, beyond the pain and the machines, I started to remember. Not like recalling a fact, or something someone told me long ago. This was different. It was like I was waking up from a very long dream, and all at once, I remembered who I really was. It wasn't dramatic. There was no voice booming from the sky. It was more like a gentle wave of knowing that moved through me, like a whisper I had always known but had somehow forgotten. I realized that Michael Rowen. This body, this name, the life I had lived for 56 years, was never the whole story. It was just a part one had played for a while. At first, I was stunned. Then came the emotion. A deep, overwhelming rush of recognition. I didn't feel small or meaningless. I felt whole. Complete. Like I had been broken off from something massive and beautiful, and now I was being placed gently back into it. There was so much love there. It wasn't like the love we feel here with all its conditions and expectations. It was pure and complete. I felt known in a way I never had before. Not judged. Not evaluated. Just seen. Completely seen, and still loved entirely. I remembered that I had chosen to come to Earth. That I had agreed to forget who I really was for a time. That it was part of the journey, to live, to struggle, to feel, and then to return. There was no anger or regret in that space. Just clarity. I could see why I'd made certain choices, even the hard ones. And I could see that, in the end, none of them had been wasted. Every moment, every connection, even the pain, it all had meaning. I wasn't floating anymore. I felt like I was everywhere at once, part of something endless. There was no time. No beginning or end. I was just being. And it felt right. It felt true. I understood then that our souls are much older than our bodies. That we carry wisdom far beyond what we realize while we're here. In that moment of remembering, I also felt a deep compassion for all of us still walking the earth. We've forgotten so much. We carry burdens that aren't really ours. We chase things that don't matter and miss the beauty that's right in front of us. I wanted to reach back and tell everyone, you're more than you think you are. You've just forgotten. But there, in that space, forgetting didn't matter. Because remembering felt like coming home. As I floated deeper into that glowing, endless space, the feeling of peace only grew stronger. The stars and colors around me seemed to hum with life, and then, all at once, I landed. I don't know how else to describe it. I landed softly, like stepping onto the floor of a place that was somehow real and not real at the same time. The light dimmed slightly, not dark, just more focused. There were tables around me, strange instruments, soft indirect lighting. It felt like some kind of waiting room between worlds. And then I saw them. 3 short figures stood a few steps ahead. They wore dark robes with hoods, their faces partly visible. Their eyes sparkled like stars, and they grinned from ear to ear like they were welcoming back an old friend. I didn't know what I was expecting to see, but it wasn't this. They weren't serious or intimidating, they were playful, almost like kids, full of joy and curiosity. One of them stepped forward and asked, "Well, how was it?" Then they all started laughing. Another said, "Do you remember us yet?" And again they burst into giggles, nudging each other like siblings sharing a secret. I couldn't help but laugh too. It felt like I did know them deep down. Like we had some ancient connection I couldn't quite reach but could feel. Their energy was so light, so accepting. There was no judgment, no pressure. Just genuine excitement and love. They asked me questions not with words, but thoughts that landed in my mind. What did you learn? What surprised you the most? Was it harder than you thought? And then he arrived. Behind them, a tall figure began to take shape, more light than body. He was long and slender, almost vaporous, with a form that shimmered and shifted like smoke in water. His name filled my mind as soon as I saw him, Orion. He didn't speak with his mouth. He didn't have to. The moment he looked at me, I felt it. This wave of love so powerful I nearly collapsed. It rushed into me, filled my chest, pressed against my throat like I was going to burst from the inside out with joy and love and something holy. Orion was calm and gentle, but he radiated this incredible wisdom. Like he knew everything I'd ever done, every thought I'd ever had, and still he loved me without condition. He didn't ask anything of me. Just stood there, smiling, like he'd waited a very long time for me to remember who I truly was. With the three little beings playfully circling around me and Orion standing quietly behind them, I felt completely safe. Accepted. Known. I understood, in that moment, that this wasn't my first time here. I have been here before. I had known them all before. And somehow, I had forgotten. But they hadn't. Orion and the three little beings never acted like they were in a hurry. Everything felt unstructured but still meaningful, like they knew what they were doing, even if I didn't. I had always heard that there would be a life review, like some kind of final exam, where you'd have to face every decision you ever made. But that's not what happened. There was no screen showing scenes from my life. No booming voice asking me to explain myself. It was nothing like that. Instead, Orion smiled and said gently, "So, what would you like to talk about?" That question caught me off guard. I paused, looking around at them, and slowly some memories began to float to the surface. Moments from my life that had stuck with me for years. Not because they were horrible or shameful, but because I had always wondered if I had chosen right. One moment that came to mind was from years ago, when I had the chance to transfer overseas for a special medical unit. My wife, Sarah, had always dreamed of traveling, and we had talked about it often. But when the offer came, I turned it down. I told myself it was the safer choice for our family, but part of me always wondered if I had chosen fear over growth. I brought it up hesitantly, expecting some kind of analysis or feedback. Instead, one of the short beings just grinned and said, "Interesting. And what do you think now?" There was no judgment, no right or wrong answer. Just open curiosity. I thought about it for a second, and I said, "Maybe it would have changed things. Maybe we would have grown in a different way." And that was it. They nodded, like they were satisfied, not with the decision, but with honesty. Another small thing I mentioned was how I had lost touch with an old friend during my service. We had an argument, and I never called him back. I told myself it didn't matter, but now it did. Again, I was met with kindness. One of the beings looked at me with a spark in his eyes and said, "So what did that teach you?" Everything was framed that way, not as failure, but as learning. They weren't there to punish me. They weren't trying to weigh my good deeds against my bad ones. They just wanted to explore with me. To understand. That was one of the most powerful things I brought back with me. We spend so much time down here beating ourselves up, thinking we'll be judged in the end. But up there? There's no courtroom. No sentence. Just truth, and love, and a deep desire to grow. The only thing that mattered was how honest I could be with myself. And even then, it was met with laughter and compassion. It made me realize that everything in life is an opportunity to learn. And we're not alone in the process. As soon as I realized where I was and how it felt, free, light, completely wrapped in peace, I knew I didn't want to leave. It wasn't even a question in my mind. There was no pain here, no pressure, no fear. Everything felt like it made sense in a way it never had before. I felt like I had come home to the truest part of myself. So when Orion gently said, "You're going back," I pushed back hard. I looked at him, stunned. No, I said. No way. You don't understand, I can't go back. I don't want to. He just smiled, like he'd heard it 1,000 times before. I mean it, I continued. My wife Sarah, she's strong. She'll be heartbroken for a while, yes, but she'll be okay. My parents, my brother, they'll grieve, but they'll move on. They're resilient. They have each other. I was trying so hard to make my case, to give them every reason why it made more sense for me to stay. There's nothing waiting for me down there that compares to this, I said, motioning around me to the warm, glowing light and the presence of these joyful, loving beings. This is the real place. That other life, it's like a dream I just woke up from. One of the short-robed beings tilted his head and grinned, like he was entertained by my effort. Orion, ever calm and full of light, stepped closer, and I felt his love like a wave, like it could carry me into eternity. You're not being sent back as punishment, he said gently. You have more to do. There are things only you can say, things only you can show. I felt tears rise in me, not from sadness exactly, but from the ache of knowing he was right. Even then, I pleaded. But it feels like I just got here. I finally feel whole. I feel like me. Another of the smaller beings chuckled softly and said, You've never not been you. You just forgot for a while. That hit me deep. I looked at them, then looked down, or what felt like down. I could sense my body, my life waiting. It felt heavy and distant, but real. A part of me was being gently pulled toward it, even as I resisted. Orion reached out, not to push, not to command, but to guide. We'll be here, he said. Always. But for now you have a path to walk. The warmth of their presence didn't fade. But I could feel the shift starting. The room I was in, or whatever it was, began to shimmer at the edges, like it was becoming less solid. A frequency changing. I looked back one more time and said, Please, just let me stay. Orion smiled, pure love in his eyes. You'll understand in time. And then everything began to dissolve. Orion's eyes never left mine. Calm, bright, filled with something deeper than words, something like eternity. His voice, when it came, was soft but absolute. It's not your time, Michael. You still have things to do. Those words hit me like a slow wave. I didn't argue this time. Not because I agreed, but because I could feel something in them, truth. Not a command, not a punishment, but a deep knowing. My heart didn't want to accept it, but something inside me did. Something older than this life, something that remembered a promise. Around me, the space began to shift. The light, once steady and warm, began to shimmer, like mist being pulled apart by wind. The soft colors, pinks, golds, blues, started to stretch and thin out, as if someone was dimming the lights of a dream. I could still feel the beings there, the three small ones still smiling, still kind. But they were fading too. Not leaving, exactly, just stepping back. Orion came closer, and with his nearness came a strange, gentle pressure in my chest. Not painful. More like a subtle push, like someone pressing a hand against my heart and guiding me downward. And then I felt it. A shift. Like the air had changed density. The way your stomach drops slightly when an elevator begins its descent. Only this wasn't a machine, it was a pull. A lowering of frequency. A descent from something pure and clear into something slower, heavier. The stars around me grew dim. The light grew distant. It wasn't scary, just sad. Like leaving a place where you're known completely, only to return to a world of forgetting. As I began to fall back, I heard Orion one last time. We'll see you again, Michael. You've never been alone. Then his voice faded, and the silence of transition took over. I felt myself descending into darkness, not cold, not empty, just shadow. The weight of the body was waiting, and I was moving toward it, whether I wanted to or not. Before I fully came back into my body, I passed through a place I don't often talk about. For a long time, I didn't even want to admit it happened. But I've come to realize it's important, maybe even more important than the rest. People need to know this part exists too. It was a space that felt close to the physical world, just beyond it. A layer between here and there. It wasn't hell. There was no torture, no monsters, nothing chasing me. But it was heavy, so heavy. Emotionally dense. The air felt thick, like fog made from sadness. There was no sound, no movement. Just a dull stillness, like a room where no one has spoken in years. I couldn't see much. The light I'd come from was far behind me now, and this place wasn't lit in any normal way. It was dim. Almost like twilight, but without warmth. If light could be tired, that's what it felt like. And I felt alone. Truly alone. I knew others must have passed through this space, but in that moment, there was no one. No presence. No comfort. Just me, and the weight of everything I had left behind, my worries, my doubts, the small fears I carried around in life without even realizing it. It wasn't malevolent, not exactly. More like a holding zone for emotional debris, for unresolved pain. I felt like I was walking through forgotten thoughts. Maybe this is what happens when people get stuck, when they're afraid to let go or too lost to move on. I didn't stay long. Maybe only seconds. But it felt longer. And when I finally got past it, and into the edge of waking life, I carried some of that weight with me. I share this not to scare anyone, but to say this: what we carry with us matters. Our thoughts, our emotions, our unresolved pain, they don't disappear when we die. They linger. And this layer, this shadow space, is proof of that. But even there, I wasn't lost. I was just passing through. When I came to, it was like waking up from the deepest sleep I'd ever had, but not rested, not refreshed. I was in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines. I could hear soft beeping, feel tubes in my arms, and the dull ache of my body returning to itself. The lights above were too bright, the air too cold. Everything felt heavy, my limbs, my chest, even my thoughts. A nurse walked by and then did a double take. She hurried over, eyes wide in surprise. "Well, look who's back," she said with a smile, trying to keep things light. "You were on hold for a bit, but I guess the call finally went through." I didn't laugh, but I appreciated the effort. Her voice grounded me a little, reminded me I was alive. She checked the monitors, called in another nurse, and I could hear quiet voices exchanging words like, "Stabilized, unexpected," and, "Thank God." I wanted to speak, to ask what happened, but I was so tired. My throat was dry, my body weak. I drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of ceiling tiles, the steady drip of floor fluids, someone adjusting a monitor. It was all so clinical, so sterile. So far from where I'd just been. And that hit me harder than anything else, the realization that I wasn't there anymore. I was back here. The sadness welled up so suddenly it almost felt like physical pain. I had been somewhere that felt more real than anything I'd ever known, and now it was gone. I felt it slipping away even as I tried to hold on to the memory. I couldn't tell if the tears in my eyes were from the exhaustion or the heartbreak. All I knew was that I didn't want to be here. Not because I didn't love my family or my life, but because that place, that light, those beings, that peace, was home. Now, back in this body, everything felt small. Closed in. The contrast was almost unbearable. But I was alive. And part of me knew that meant there was more I had to do. I just didn't know what yet. The weeks after I left the hospital were some of the hardest of my life. Not because of physical pain, though I was weak and had to slowly rebuild, but because of the emotional weight I carried. I was back in this world, but I didn't feel like I belonged in it anymore. There was a constant ache in my chest, like a homesickness that never quite went away. I grieved, but not for my life. I grieved the loss of that place. That light. That feeling of being completely seen, loved, and known. I missed the peace. I missed Orion. I missed the way everything made sense over there, how none of the worries of this world mattered. Here, everything felt jumbled again, noisy, sharp, uncertain. I tried to explain what had happened to me a few times, but I could see how people looked at me. Like I'd been through something strange they couldn't relate to. Some even gently suggested I had imagined it, that maybe it was the medications or a dream. So I stopped talking. I packed the experience away in my heart and carried it in silence for nearly 20 years. When I retired, something shifted. I had more time and fewer expectations placed on me. The memory of what happened came rushing back like a flood, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started reading, researching, quietly connecting with others who had similar stories. It helped me make peace with it. It helped me see that I wasn't alone. Slowly, I began to share. Not with everyone, just with people who were grieving or searching for answers. A woman who lost her son. A man whose wife passed suddenly. A couple who couldn't understand why their child had to go. I'd sit with them, sometimes in silence, sometimes for hours, and I'd tell them gently. No one really dies. I'd tell them the truth I now knew: we are not our bodies. We are not these passing moments of pain and confusion. We are light, we are spirit, and we go home when our time here is done. And it is a good home. It is full of love. It is real. I've come to understand that love is the center of all things. It's the thread that holds everything together, this world and the next. When we live with love, when we give love, we are tapping into that same energy I felt out there among the stars. So no, I don't fear death. Not anymore. If anything, I look forward to the day I return, not because I want to escape this life, but because I know the truth now. We are eternal. We are never alone. And what waits for us is more beautiful than anything we can imagine.